Thousands attended. The people dispersed, and thus the hoax ended. The magistrates ordered their officers out to disperse the crowds, but by then even more had arrived, this time great numbers of servants who had received letters offering them positions. It was long after dark before Mrs. Tottenham was left in peace. Those in the know had, almost from the first, suspected that this was a trick perpetrated by Theodore Hook, a composer, farceur, and man about town. Today his main claim to fame is that one of his plays was mocked by Byron in English Bards and Scotch Reviewers. But at the time, the author of Teleki was famous in his own right for pranks and practical jokes as much as his writing. Rumour immediately attributed this hoax to Hook, claiming that he had sent out hundreds, some said thousands of letters, ordering goods and services, answering advertisements for lost or found items, and directing all to 54 Berner Street, before hiring rooms in the house across the road so he and his friends might watch the fun in comfort. Nancy Matthews, the wife of the actor Charles Matthews and a great friend of Hook, claimed after his death that it was not he who had perpetrated this hoax at all. It had been, she said, designed and executed by a young gentleman, now a high and one of the most rigid churchmen in the kingdom. The reality of an unnamed person is always slightly suspect, but it is worth noting that Hook's brother, also conveniently deceased by this time, had been Dean of Worcester, and the Dean's son was a high churchman with decidedly Tory leanings. Mrs. Matthews' chief point was that this famous hoax was not the original. Hook, she said, had not been the perpetrator of the Berner Street hoax, but had instead been responsible for an earlier hoax, which she said occurred in Bedford Street. For weeks, she claimed, he had assiduously replied to classified advertisements in the newspapers. Everything lost had been found by Mr. of Bedford Street. Everything found had been lost by Mr. of Bedford Street. Every servant wanting a place was sure to find an excellent one in the family of Mr. of Bedford Street. If money was to be borrowed, it would be lent on the most liberal terms by Mr. of Bedford Street. If money was to be lent, it would be borrowed on most advantageous interest by Mr. of Bedford Street. And sure enough, on the following day, punctual as a lover, came honest men leading the animals they had found, expecting their reward, and disconsolate owners of missing pets, hoping to regain the favourites they had lost. Men and maids, eager for situations, congregated in such numbers that there was not a place left. By and by came carts with large teams, with many a cauldron of coal labouring up the narrow slanting street, followed by pianoforte carriages, crates of china and glass, rolls of carpeting, potatoes and firewood, trays of turtle, bags of flour, packages of flannel and linen, packing cases and trunks of every dimension, chariots and horses, asses, dogs, brewers' drays and butchers' trays, confectionery and books, wheelbarrows, surgeons' instruments and mangles, sides of bacon, boots and shoes, bows and arrows, guns and pistols, etc., etc. As with Berners Street later, when the hoax was discovered, at first everyone was enraged, until a change of mood overcame the crowd, and each person hoaxed remained for the sheer amusement of seeing their successors being imposed upon in turn. On each arrival, a loud huzzah from the assembled crowd proclaimed, "A brother won!" Whether the site was Bedford Street or Berners Street, the hoax took place in public, to be enjoyed by the public, not by a discerning, self-selecting group, as would buy a book or a newspaper or go to a play, but by the indiscriminate pedestrian, the random passer-by. The perpetrator of the hoax, whether Hook or the high and rigid churchman, saw the streets not as a place to pass through on the way from one building to another, but as a place worth being in. 2 months later, an epilogue to a play staged at the Lyceum included a mention of a hoax that had set London in a grin for the pleasure of giving gazing mobs a treat. The enjoyment was not for the perpetrators, but for the participants, those in the street. The streets of London in the 19th century were, in many cases, the same ones we walk today. But not only did they look different,